Nature is made possible by public television stations, your gas company and America's gas industry, bringing natural gas through 1 million miles of underground pipelines to 160 million people, fueling factories, heating homes, and cooking meals.
Hi, I'm George Page, and this week on Nature, our story is about the remarkable work of a pioneering American scientist. Man, as it turns out, was not the first creature on Earth to develop highly sophisticated methods of chemical warfare. Insects did that millions of years ago. But until recently, very little was known about nature's chemist of the insect world. Much of what we know now, which you'll see stunningly illustrated, comes from the experiments of Professor Thomas Eisner and his associates at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. Tom Eisner's world is largely invisible to the naked eye, but he shares that world with us in our film, Secret Weapons. Explorations of our lively planet can now extend down into a world of the infinitely small. With new instruments, new techniques, and new ideas, we can rescan familiar and unfamiliar life forms. Through our new eyes, we enter an alien environment. Here, the struggle for existence is no cliché. It means possessing ways to ward off attack, weapons that can, at a moment's notice, spring to the defense of a life. The setting, Arizona, summer 1982. The explorer, Professor Tom Eisner. His passion, the secret world of insects and the hidden weapons they use in defense. Insects, it's been said, will inherit the Earth. In fact, they all but own it today. Their total number staggers the imagination. Billions upon billions, 200 million for every single human being alive. And their diversity is infinite. They crawl, they fly, they swim, they live above ground, beneath it, and in the water. They range from the spectacular to the menacing, to the almost invisible. They court, breed, and produce hordes of offspring. They live alone or in societies by the million. And in their masses, they are threatened. Insects are the main food of many predators. They're at risk at each and every stage of their lives. And the key to their survival is defense. Some escape detection by camouflage. Others rely on stealth, while many take to the wing. But most can surprise us with the novelty of their secret weapons.
Camouflage and agility are by no means the only forms of defense in insects. The primary form of defense is chemical defense. Insects are among the most versatile chemists in nature, and there's practically no limit to the diversity of their chemical weaponry. The little grasshopper I just picked up This beautiful black and yellow animal is really impossible for a predator to handle. When disturbed, it regurgitates its stomach contents. It then gives off a very foul-smelling froth from its respiratory openings. And finally, it hops away. And it is very conspicuous, as if it were to announce its defensive potential. Conspicuous insects are easy to find. Right here is a cluster of beetles, red and black beetles, which give off a very badly tasting acid, which makes the animal invulnerable to birds.
Flashy colors and gaudy patterns convey a message to the predator. Watch out, I have a hidden weapon. The conspicuous display advertises the secret defenses. Penetrating the mysteries of this colorful facade, Eisner has turned to his colleagues in the fields of chemistry, electronics, and engineering. Together, they have teased out the intricacies of the insect armory. Few of us have escaped the best known, the sting of the bee, quick in its action, persistent in its pain. Once discarded, remarkably, it continues to deliver its poison. This is but one weapon within a battery lined up against the world. Ants also sting. Predators too large to be discouraged by a few ants may respond to the sting of many and eventually be thrown into flight. Ants are among the most formidable of predators. An undefended beetle wandering into their midst is quickly brought to a halt. Swarms of ants from a nearby nest overwhelm it. Another beetle takes the same path and makes it through. A look-alike, it's actually another species called Eleodes. It pauses on the nest site and is inspected. No swarms of ants materialize. So what is it about this animal that makes it so invulnerable?
This beetle is able to walk through ants with impunity, but it's also well defended against virtually any other predator that roams the desert soil. When confronted, it stands on its head. But this in itself is not the defense. That is just an announcement of things to come. The actual defense of the animal is a chemical defense, consisting of the ejection of a repellent fluid from the tip of the abdomen. Invisible as such, the secretion can be demonstrated by its chemical reaction on special paper. This black marking on the paper is an indication of the repellent that the animal produces. For minutes after the discharge, it reeks of a powerful, irritating fluid which allows it to walk past any predator. Most predators approach their prey face first. They literally head into trouble. This beetle doesn't hurt me because I use my hand. It's not so sensitive as my nose, mouth, and especially my eyes. If the predator persists, the beetle wipes secretion from its abdomen with its legs and wafts it around.
The chemicals produced by Eleodes are well-known poisons called quinones. In the laboratory, these poisons carry warning labels that alert the chemist to take care. Eleodes warns its enemies with a headstand. It's potential food for many, including this desert mouse in Arizona. Furtive and beguiling, the grasshopper mouse is in fact a ferocious and fearless hunter. It pounces on any insect and can devour dozens in quick succession. But Eleodes poses a problem. The mouse attacks, squinting its eyes for protection, but the quinones take their effect. The attack continues, but the mouse retreats, wiping its nose in the ground. Another try, the same result, but now the mouse changes its technique. It grasps the beetle, holding it upright, and begins to eat, while forcing the beetle's rear into the ground. There, the secretion squirts out, wasted and ineffective. All that remains of the beetle is its shell and the tip containing the poisons. Eleodes' defenses have been broken through, and Eisner knows of no other predator that can do this. Propelled by innumerable legs, a millipede walks conspicuously across the desert floor. Not an insect, but a close relative, it too produces quinones. A very effective defense. But it has another up its sleeve. It can outwit a mouse or a small mammal by anticipating the attack. It responds to an inquisitive breath. Merely a puff will provoke it to coil. It protects its vulnerable head at the center of its spiral, then offers the attacker its second form of defense. Toxic quinones, which ooze from its sides and spread a protective cloud of repellent vapor all around it. Danger over, it slowly walks away, shrouded in toxic fumes. No mouse could eat a millipede, nor mistake it on meeting it again. Moving slowly and deliberately is usually a sign of self-assurance, so it's not surprising to learn that whip scorpions have confidently roamed the earth for over 500 million years. A distant relative of spiders and scorpions, it threatens with menacing pincers and a whip of a tail. And there's something else besides.
It has an incredibly effective chemical defense. If I really press my attack home on him, say hold him gently in forceps, then give him a little bit of a squeeze, and then he sprays. He sprays a mixture containing 85% acetic acid, the active ingredient of vinegar. And he can aim in virtually every direction. The animal's common name is vinegaroon, most appropriate for an animal that sprays acetic acid.
And so even if the pincers don't scare, an eye full of concentrated acid is bound to repel the predator. As curious onlookers, we want to ask more questions. How can this creature withstand its own secretion? How do the glands make and store the acid? And why isn't the whip scorpion bothered by being showered by its own spray? These and many other questions are still to be answered. But it's just these sorts of questions that excite an inquisitive biologist. Clear across the continent, over 2,000 miles away in Florida, Tom Eisner returns to one of his favorite haunts. For 25 years, he's visited this small piece of wild pine and palm. The palmetto palm hides a wealth of wildlife, a refuge for some and a hunting ground for others. It's also a hunting ground for Eisner. In this new field where biology meets chemistry, he's continually opening up unexpected avenues of exploration. In pursuit of his interest in the strategies animals adopt to survive and the interactions between predators and their prey, Eisner looks beyond the commonplace. What you and I might dismiss at a glance, he looks at and looks at again. His starting point is simple observation.
Some years ago, I caught sight of this tiny beetle, smaller even than a ladybird, a flat-footed clockwork toy, just lovely to watch as it marched up and down the palm. I noticed its feet, which seemed oversized, but I certainly never suspected that by following up on this observation, I would end up working with an engineer to unravel an amazing story of defense involving a totally different use of a chemical.
Ants on the prowl, fiercely aggressive and intent on the hunt. You'd expect them to snap up this beetle with no trouble. Hemispherota by name, its hemispherical shape pays off. It clamps down when attacked, as if held by suction. At the touch of an ant, the beetle's reaction is immediate. There's nothing for the ant to grab. The legs and antennae are safely tucked away. The ant perseveres, but so does the beetle. A momentary lapse on the part of the beetle and the ant strikes, grasping the edge of the beetle's shell. But the beetle keeps its hold. Its body is obviously not a suction cup. A trivial observation, but a clue to Eisner that it held on with those funny feet. They are large for a reason. Its very life depends on them. Although the ant struggles furiously to pry off the beetle, the leverage doesn't seem to work. Eisner timed the persistence of the ants. They usually gave up in less than a minute. The beetle's endurance was longer. It nearly always emerged the winner, none the worse for the experience. So there was more to the beetle than met the eye. Eisner looked again.
I needed to know what those feet looked like and exactly how they worked. And I wanted to get some real idea of the beetle's clinging power. I got a feel for that by pretending to be an ant. I tickled the beetle and it responded beautifully. But in these days of technology, there are better and more scientific ways of making measurements. Well, the beetle's still in its vial, clinging very nicely in the palmetto. Question now is, how hard does he cling? And since he won't talk to us, we're going to try to persuade him to work with us. And to do that, I'm going to attach him to a little wire hook with a droplet of wax, which I'm going to melt, put on his back. My goodness, he's not even letting go of the palmetto. There we go. I'm I'm going to take him now and make him part of a very ingenious engineering experiment designed by my colleague Dan. I'm hanging him by a little hook where he's now suspended above a platform of palmetto, which I'm raising to bring it in contact with his feet. And what we're going to do electronically now is to pull the ground from under him with an electromagnet which pulls on this platform here. The pull is registered by this instrument here and displayed on this oscilloscope. Why don't we get it started? Okay. The pull is beginning. It's rising. Still holding on. Rising. Rising. 1 gram. There he goes. Beautiful. Well, I think we should try the same beetle again. Let's release the pull from the platform. All right. Let's bring it up to horizontal. He's attached again. I'm going to start to pull. Okay, we're getting up to 1. He's still holding. 1.5. Just passing 2, still holding. 2.5. Almost 3, and that's it. Well, 10 milligram beetle, 3 grams. That's 300 times its body weight. Can you imagine hanging from the ceiling by your feet with an automobile in each hand? Well, the remaining question is, how does he hold on? And one possibility, of course, is that he has hooks and that he uses hooks to anchor himself. Well, if that's the case, he should not be able to hold on to glass. Well, let's just see whether he can lift glass. Well, he obviously can. Well, let's see if he can lift an even bigger piece than that. Marvelous. So, hooks cannot be involved. There has to be some other mechanism that he uses. One possibility, of course, that he uses a glue. But it doesn't have to be a glue. All one has to do to lift one solid with another solid is to have a thin intervening film of a liquid. You can lift a piece of glass with another piece of glass by just having a drop of water between them. And we can do that right here. Put a droplet of water on a piece of glass, squeeze that droplet, and I can lift. Well, the beetle does just that with his feet.
So, what are its feet like? Through a microscope, the beetle's 6 feet loom large. At higher magnification, each foot begins to reveal its structure. It's made up of thousands of bristles. At even higher magnification, under the electron microscope, the detail is resolved. Each tip is forked with 2 contact pads at the end. Remove the beetle, and where it set its feet is a print of thousands of droplets, each a drop of oil, and that's the secret of its adherence. The oil oozes from tiny wells at the base of the bristles, then seeps into the space between them and onto the tips. Thus it wets the pads. Each pad is a tiny version of the wetted glass disc, but wetted by oil instead of water. Under attack, it's those discs that give the beetle its staying power. A few bristles couldn't hold tight, but the beetle has 60,000 ready for instant action. So the defensive chemical is neither poison nor repellent, just a harmless yet vital oil. Some animals have even more bizarre answers to defense. The creature shielded beneath this tanglewood is the larva of Hemispherota. It starts life as a large egg coated with a protective encrustment of its mother's fecal pellets. The larva emerges naked, but immediately begins to feed on the rather unnutritious palmetto. What it can't digest, it voids, but doesn't get rid of it. It uses the feces to build up a dry string thatch all over it. One by one, the emerging strands curled round and produce an impregnable shield. Predators can't break through, or they ignore it, unaware of the morsel beneath. Energy conscious, the larva recycles plant materials at no cost to itself and doesn't waste valuable energy in creating its own defensive poisons. Plants themselves are often chemically protected. It's not in their interest either to get eaten. Few animals will attempt to feed on this plant, camphor weed. But one insect is undeterred and visits it, not to eat, but to exploit it. It's called Apiomyrus. The leaves and stalks of camphor weed are covered by thousands of tiny droplets of sticky resin that reek of camphor, a powerful insect repellent. Apiomyrus seeks out this plant and laboriously harvests the droplets. It's found an economical way of getting its defensive chemicals by stealing them rather than making them. First, it scrapes up the secretion with its front legs and wipes it onto the middle pair. Then it slowly removes it with its hind legs and plasters it all over its belly. There, it gradually builds up to form a pasty coating. Only the female performs this painstaking task. It is, in fact, a labor of love. On laying her eggs, she coats them with a layer of the goo so they're sticky and protected. What works for the plant against plant eaters now protects her eggs against egg eaters. There are few plant eaters on pines. The aromatic scent and stickiness that's familiar to us all is the pine's protection, resin. But a few insects, like the sawfly larvae, can cope with it. They eat the pine needles, but separate the resin, storing it harmlessly just within the mouth in a protectively lined sac. There it lies in readiness for the larvae's defense. A larva can instantly burp up its droplet of resin, and the repellent takes effect. The smell drives off the ant, and if it gets glue on its legs, it may get permanently entangled. The droplet is eased out, but danger over is sucked in again and held for later use. Few of us realize how many plants are protected by their own chemicals. The milkweed is no exception. It squirts out its poison when injured, but again, some insects are undeterred. Some caterpillars, including those of the monarch butterfly, even accumulate the chemicals in their bodies and retain them as they grow and develop. So, as adult butterflies, they themselves are laden with the poisons, beneficiaries of what they gained in their youth. Many insects use the same strategy. If an insect has evolved a way of being insensitive to a plant's poisons, then why not use these poisons in its own defense against others? Eisner and his colleagues have made a detailed study of one moth that lives on a poisonous legume. And the research turned out to have an unexpected twist. The moth is called Utathiza.
We first noticed that the caterpillars of Utathiza competed for the seeds of the plant. That's where the poisons are concentrated, and they're very potent. Chemically, they're a type of alkaloid, bitter and highly toxic to us. The caterpillar chews its way into the pod and eats the whole seed. When the larvae are crowded on the plant, there may be winners and losers in this competition. Those best able to break into the pod may end up with the most poisonous alkaloid in their bodies. And as an adult, the moth retains them. Unlike many other moths that remain hidden by day, Utathiza risks exposure. The poisonous alkaloids are its defense, the coloration its warning. Red, white, and yellow make it extremely conspicuous. Bright and attractive, it lives in a world full of many dangers. Utathiza has problems with spiders. If it flies into an orb-weaving spider, it might be eaten. It may have problems with bats. And, of course, it may have problems with birds. Birds are among the major enemies of Utathiza. They feed on many insects. And these scrub jays, in particular, are aggressive toward insects that come within sight.
Eisner tested the moth's palatability. He offered the scrub jays edible and inedible insects. First, a tasty moth.
You like a moth? Would you like to get a moth?
It's eaten with relish. Now the jay is given a choice: edible insects in the palm and an Utathiza between thumb and forefinger. All but Utathiza are taken. The warningly colored moth is undoubtedly seen but ignored. It will survive another day. The gourmet jay remains selective and only accepts the best. Another edible moth is grabbed and eaten piecemeal.
Pulling the wings out, they often do that. Wings are thus just scales and paper, essentially. It's like taking the wrapper off a candy bar. The head. Thorax and body. That was the good part. Now, you liked that, didn't you?
Utathiza continues to be ignored, whether offered by itself or in combination with edible insects. It survives an occasional peck, but is obviously well protected. The research didn't end here. It developed to reveal that in the courtship of the moths, the poisonous alkaloids have another intriguing role to play. For all his work on the moth's defense, he had to breed them in great numbers. When in their separate boxes, both male and females are relatively inactive, but once united in an artificial nuptial chamber, they perform a courting dance quite naturally. With his frantic fluttering, it's hard to see what the male does.
The dance that the male performs around the female is too quick to really follow with the naked eye. So we resort to photography, flash photography, which catches events in a nice frozen fashion. And it was by means of this flash photography that we eventually learned exactly what goes on when these two are interacting.
Eisner took dozens of photos, always trying to catch the male when closest to the female. Some pictures were timed just right and gave him the answer. During the flutter, the male opens up his abdominal tip and exposes a hidden structure. This he brushes against the female. The microscope revealed that he has 2 brushes for that purpose, splayed at the moment of contact. And every bristle of the brush is coated with a secretion. It's at once an aphrodisiac and the carrier of a very special message. By greatly increasing the magnification, he was able to find exactly where the secretion was coming from. It was oozing out between the sculpturing on the surface from tiny pores.
I asked some friends who are chemists to analyze the secretion, and they found it was derived from the poisonous alkaloid eaten by the caterpillar. This set us thinking. We speculated that the amount of defensive chemical the male caterpillar stores will, in due course, be measured by the female moth by judging how potent his aphrodisiac is.
The males were raised on an artificial diet with no alkaloid. They grew up into normal-looking adults, but they had no defensive chemical, so no aphrodisiac either. The next step was to see whether the female responded in a different way to males with the aphrodisiac and those without. The female is presented with both. She initiates courtship. She climbs up a plant and emits her sexual attractant, which drifts downwind. A male flies in and begins his fluttering dance. Not surprisingly, the test showed that the female preferred males with the aphrodisiac. She was more likely to mate with them. They were also best protected chemically. Eisner believes that females favor males which are the best at storing poisonous alkaloid. This ability might be inherited, so it will also benefit their offspring. Their caterpillars will be better alkaloid gatherers and have a better chance of survival. At night, our eyes are blind to most natural dramas played out on the woodland floor. But there's some insects that flash out their own picture of life and death in a visual Morse code. The signals speak not only of courtship, but deceit, and reveal a new dimension in the use of chemicals in defense.
I've just collected a net full of fireflies. Fireflies are the one insect that one can see at night. It's an insect that every American child knows. The males and the females are active at night trying to find one another. The ones I've collected are all males. They're flashing, and they ordinarily flash when they fly, because in fact they're announcing their presence to the females.
The females sit waiting on a plant and answer the males with a welcoming flash. It's a courtship duet in lights. The male responds to her reply and flies down to mate. Each species of firefly has its own individual code of flashes. A female identifies her own male by the rhythm and number of flashes. Then she answers after a specific time. Few mistakes are made and compatible partnerships are forged. The code of the visual duet is precise and ensures that the mating encounters are of the right kind. But encounters of the wrong kind do occur. There are fireflies, female fireflies, that deliberately set out to break the code. During the courtship, they attract their own males for mating from the many, signaling above. But these same females can deceive the males of other species by imitating their females. They mimic another's courtship flash and lure down a stranger, but not for mating. She is a femme fatale, and the male has been enticed to his death. For a female about to lay eggs, prey caught so easily is certainly a boon. But this elaborate counterfeit is not just to obtain food. There's an additional bonus. It was discovered that the males she eats are full of defensive chemicals, this time poisonous steroids. The femme fatale has no steroids of her own. She's defenseless. Her skill is to acquire them in this ingenious way. She builds the male steroids into her own body. Now, she too is poisonous and protected. She's most vulnerable when searching for a place to lay her eggs. A wolf spider waits in ambush. Touched and tasted, the female firefly is rejected, saved by her newly acquired steroids. They seem to leave a nasty taste, but neither spider nor firefly is permanently harmed. There are times and places when working at night, we would welcome having our own built-in chemical defense against midges and mosquitoes. We rely on creams and lotions and a wary eye on the bigger beasts that bite. Of all the insects that are chemically protected, there's no doubt which takes the prize: the bombardier beetle. Its weaponry, a salvo of artillery. It's a high-tech beetle without parallel in the animal kingdom. No insect has been so much sheer fun to work with as the bombardier beetle. Just watching how it fends off an attack is spectacular. You can actually see it fire and hear the shot. It's long been known that these beetles spray poisonous quinones. They fire them from their abdominal tip with a crack and a puff of smoke. Bombardiers have a well-stocked armory. If under constant attack, they can fire more than 20 times, and they're amazingly quick at it. Their escape is immediate, leaving the spider with a mouthful of quinone. It wipes its body on the ground. Then it frantically cleans its mouth parts. Toads, too, hunt at night. They gulp their food, striking and swallowing at one fell swoop. The bombardier's fast retort stops the toad in mid-action. The crack, the puff of smoke, and the instant action all point to a very sophisticated form of defense. What is it that the toad feels on its tongue? Is it just an irritation, some sort of chemical soreness? Eisner put the question to the test.
I popped the bombardier beetle in my mouth and could sympathize with the toads. There was an acrid taste, but also an immediate peppery burning sensation. And the beetle seemed to be such a phenomenal marksman. Even small ants were always hit. We simply had to take this animal into the laboratory for a closer look. One of the really amazing things about this animal is its ability to spray in a very beautifully aimed fashion. And that shows up very nicely when you put the animal on indicator paper. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pinch very lightly one leg after the other, just as if I were an ant biting these legs. I'm going to start with the right hind leg, right front leg, left front leg. In fact, in nature, a beetle would actually be able to walk away through a swarm of ants after having discharged only once. Well, he's performed. I'm going to take him off the wax, which is very easy to do, and put him back. Oops. Well, you probably heard that. He just fired. I felt it because the spray is hot. Bombardier beetles, when they spray, are really producing a chemical explosion, which not only produces sound, but also produces heat. Now, if one wants to measure that temperature, one cannot use a conventional thermometer because the explosions are very short, only a few thousandths of a second. You need a special thermometer, an electronic thermometer, which responds very quickly to a very short production of heat. Now, let me just move the beetle back ever so slightly.
Over now.
Okay.
The thermometer is on.
And there we go.
Yeah.
10, 20, 50, it's about 90, 95 degrees.
Yep.
And those are centigrade degrees. It's scalding hot.
We've actually been recording the sound that the beetle produces. There's a microphone in the back of the tube that picks up the sound, and there's a tape recorder on which we've recorded the sound. Now, one of the remarkable things is that there's information in that sound. We can find out about that information if we slow the sound down. We can do that. We can watch the sound on the oscilloscope at the same time that we listen to the slowed down version.
The oscilloscope shows clearly that the spray is pulsed. The next step is to see it.
There we go.
Okay, the lights up.
They set up a camera to film it in slow motion.
Okay, I'll give you the word on camera. Let me get close to that
Timer
leg
started.
first. Not quite yet. Go.
At 400 frames per second, the action has been slowed down, but not enough to see the individual pulses. So they went to a lab and filmed the beetle at an even faster speed, at an incredible 4,000 frames a second.
Oh, look at that.
There were the pulses, each one corresponding to the individual bursts of sound. And that wasn't the end of the story. They were intrigued by the mechanism of a weapon that could pulse explosions. Inside the rear of the beetle, there's a pair of glands, each with a large chamber containing hydroquinones and hydrogen peroxide. When the beetle fires, the chamber is compressed, forcing the compounds into a small reaction chamber. Their enzymes set off an explosion, creating hot quinones, which then shoot out. Explosions are repeated one after the other, each forming a separate pulse of spray. The beetle makes explosions in sequence because the reaction chamber is too small to handle more than a little explosive at a time. A big reaction chamber could handle more explosive, but the heat produced would make things too hot for the beetle itself. Nature is indeed incredible. Among the spiders, there's a bombardier disposal squad. The orb weavers can just about cope with this explosive beetle. A bombardier rarely shoots when handled with care. Flying into a web doesn't provoke it to fire. Nor does it react when spun into a cocoon of silk. By the time it does shoot, it's too late. The swathing of silk muffles the explosion, and the spider is only stunned. The The beetle's shroud is wound more thickly, and though it continues to fire, its fate is sealed. There's no escape. Here is a challenge to what seemed an infallible defense. All these insects and their allies are in effect exploiting nature's chemistry set, making full use of the same fun and games that mischievous children might in making their first stink bombs. But among the many millions of insects, the game is hugely varied and played for real. This is an arms race between predator and prey, which we have scarcely started to explore. The scenes at the end of our film showing the bombardier beetle and the spider were actually shot on the last day of filming near Portal, Arizona. That was the end of the film, but it wasn't the end of the day's excitement. After dinner that evening, Tom Eisner decided to take one last look around before turning in. Cameraman Roger Jackman went with him. And standing near a small pond, Roger thought he saw something quite remarkable. He called to Tom, and together they observed the following strange sight. Thousands of spadefoot toads, just emerged from the tadpole stage, were climbing out of the water and sitting on the muddy shores of the pond. They were all very small, just under an inch in length. Suddenly, Jackman saw one of them almost disappear into the mud. Jackman and Eisner then noticed that many of the toads had been pulled down into the mud, with only their heads sticking out. Others were dead or dying. When Tom and Roger tried to pull a toad out of the mud, they felt a strong resisting force. Guessing that some unseen predator lurked beneath the surface, they dug into the mud but found nothing. Whatever it was seemed capable of quick, evasive burrowing. Eventually, Tom Eisner decided to take a sample of the mud back to his laboratory for testing. There he found a large grub-like insect larva, the early stage of a type of horsefly. About as long as the toads, the larva, as Eisner discovered, can grab any toad that settles above it with its hook-like mandibles and pull it beneath the surface. There it drains the poor toad of its blood and body fluids. Tom Eisner and Roger Jackman published their findings. It was the very first time this natural phenomenon had been recorded in a scientific journal. For those of us who work on nature, it's rewarding to know that sometimes the production of our films results in a new scientific discovery by our colleagues. I'm George Page for Nature.
Nature is made possible by public television stations, your gas company, and America's gas industry, developing new sources of gas energy and ways to use gas more efficiently for more than 160 million people across America.
Next week, we go to India, to the Bharatpur National Park, in one unusual year when the monsoon rains fail to arrive. The Missing Monsoon, our film next week on Nature.